Hi, it's David here. This is the fourth video I'm showing the uh, deliberate creation structure in TSU uh, to avoid bigotry where possible. This week is racism, and let me give you some really interesting, well, awkward context. It's the first video for this series was I actually recorded it the first weekend of all the riots, against police brutality in the US, which is still going on 3 weeks later. Also, rah rah, go them. But this has been it's been a bizarre year, but it's been a particularly weird month because my plan to do this series of videos happened way before lots of other stuff. I started thinking about it sort of January, and just as I was going to film the first video, the riots started, and I double checked with a friend because I knew that one of the subjects I was going to do was racism, whether it was appropriate or not to do this one first. And my friend was like, no, don't. That's give people their airtime. Don't, piggyback on their stuff, because especially as their stuff's quite frankly scary, and people need as much people boosting their voices rather than your own, especially with a face that looks white. But so I didn't start with racism. I just went back to my original plan, which was the order that I added or tweaked these ideas into the story. Now, technically, racism I've been trying to figure out for about as long as the sexism, so it could have gone first. It was going to be second instead of, but it was going to be second, and then I thought, it still feels like, because it's still going on, I don't want to piggyback. I don't want to be rude like that. It's just totally rude. But it's nearly the end of the month now, and I've only got this one, and ableism. And ableism is going to be a long one, and I need more planning time, so it has to be racism today. But the double irony is, it's also, it's the 20th today, 20th of June today, in New Zealand. In the US, it's the 19th. I did not know about Juneteenth. I knew nothing. And in my defense, I don't live in the US, so I just hadn't stubbed a toe against it. I'm usually probably more focused on my my naming day, which is on the 13th. Had I known about Juneteenth, I probably wouldn't have made the thematic date of the 19th of Arakan the 19th. I would have made it like the 17th or the 21st, or but that was created thematically a very long time ago. It also correlates to a family thing that's important as well. So, but here I am on Juneteenth. This year is the first year I find out what it means, and so I'm doing racism on Juneteenth, which feels really awkward for me, and I feel like it's not my place, if you will. But I'm not going to post it today. I usually let things settle for a couple of days, then watch it again and make sure I'm not completely screwing it up. But it's been a very strange, very challenging month. The week I did transphobia was the week that J.K. Rowling came out with the big freaking gender critical manifesto. So it's been one of those months, everything's lined up in the most awkward ways possible. Oh well. I guess it's all about sort of synchronicity and connection, and we are all connected whether people care about it or not. Other people's struggles, particularly public struggles, affect everyone who see it. So I'm just putting it out there. I'm not deliberately being a jerk. I'm actually trying to be as respectful as possible, but I've run out of time, so I have to do it today. Right, so video 4. This is about racism, or more specifically, trying to create a world without racism. I started out early with this idea, with no idea what it actually is, what racism is. So I made a few mistakes, and some of them I can't fix, but in the story without changing. Like, I'd have to change Nalana's entire identity, because her anyway, I'll go into that later, but when you grow up, in my situation, I look white, but I'm actually Māori, which is the native people of New Zealand, tangata whenua, and when you grow up looking white but being Māori, native on the inside, in your heart and your spirit, it's painful. It's painful in a completely different way than it is for people who look Māori, having to do with systemic racism and the very prolific racism in New Zealand, even though most of the white people in New Zealand don't see it and claim that it doesn't exist, and we're all nice and lovely and happy in New Zealand. We're not racist, la 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 la. I shall put my bitchiness aside. But when you're in the middle, it's a very unique sort of agony. It's actually similar for me to having to live as a woman when not knowing I wasn't, or there was nothing in womanhood that particularly appealed to me or felt like me. I had to, just to survive, I had to pretend to be white. I had to I avoided as much as humanly possible repeating anything horrible, and I tried, when there was an opportunity to stand with people, I tried to walk away from the white side and went to the brown side. Got in trouble for that a couple of times, especially at school. But I still, in order to be safe, had to sort of hide when I could. And that meant hanging out with white people while they bitch and moan about other races, and it's really isolating, because you think, well, if they knew, would they be my friend? Would they say this crap in front of me? Because they would say, oh, not you, no, not you, no, all the other brown people, not you. That argument annoys the hell out of me, because it's actually the opposite. The people that they're bitching and moaning about are the minority, and people use that minority as the stereotype for an entire population of people. You know, I'm the nice beneficiary. I'm the nice Māori. I'm the nice disabled person, you know, or the intelligent disabled person in this case. I don't know why, but in New Zealand, people think that if your body doesn't work so well, your brain doesn't either. The amount of people I've had sort of verbally patting me on the head, like I can't make my own decisions. Anyway, next video is ableism, so we'll put that on the shelf for this week. But for me, there wasn't, other than when I specifically stood with my non-white friends or non-white peers in particular issues, and online when I've tried to voice my experiences or translate. Sometimes it's sort of like two desperate groups who can't communicate, and I because I'm in the middle and I've had to deal with both sides, I can sometimes translate. Having to live in that dual invisible place where you don't belong in either group, is really painful and really difficult, and you can't really talk about it like on Twitter or Facebook or wherever, because the whiter folk tell you to shut up because, you know, you're white, what are you talking about? And the browner folk tell you to shut up because you're white, what the fuck are you talking about? And you can't belong in either group, because I don't want to hang out with a bunch of white people bitching and moaning about a particular race or group of people. Here it's different groups, but I actually hear more Islamophobia here than I do mostly anti-Māori sentiment, which I find disgusting. But you can't really claim either identity. You can't publicly just be who you are. The only way I could do that is if I had like a full facial moko, but then I wouldn't be saying, hey, I'm Māori. I'd be saying, hey, I belong to a gang, which is also not helpful because too many people associate Māoridom with savagery and therefore gangs. And see, all of these ideas, they all tumble about and they screw you up, and even though I don't get followed around in shops by shopkeepers because I look white, but I've watched my Māori peers, particularly when I was at school, followed around by shopkeepers. And so while I haven't been on the receiving end of personal, like directed directly at me, unless I'm standing there with people, I've experienced it through others, through observing that if only the white people knew, I would be treated like that too. Like every time I interact with a cop, I'm just like, pretend you're white, pretend you're white, pretend you're white, pretend you're white. And, you know, we don't even have armed cops here, you know? And so my experience of racism is really wobbly, and it shifts. And I have the privilege of being able to hide. If I shut my mouth and I walk away, people will think I'm white, which is why I try really hard not to shut my mouth in circumstances where it's important, where it's someone else's life or someone else's need to feel that solidarity. But I can hide, and I have, particularly at university. And so it's sort of like I'm not allowed to speak about my experiences of racism because I'm not brown enough. But if I try and bowl other white people up, you know, if I'm officially a white person, if I try and bowl other white people up, they go, "Oh, not you," or they get violent or yell or scream. And I've had quite a lot of yelling and screaming. And there's sort of no place to belong in the middle. It took a very long time for me to realize that I don't need other people's permission to exist as I am. I don't have to care what other people think I am. I mean, there are some things I do need to care about to protect myself physically, but for the most part, it doesn't matter if that person, stranger across the road, thinks I'm white, because they don't know me. And that's taken, I'm 41 and a half. It's taken this long for me to realize that. And I'm rambling because it's quite a personal, fresh pain for me, particularly with watching the what was going on with the riots and the protests and what the cops were doing and probably still doing, even though it's less public now. It felt like Pulse. it felt like if I'd been born there, I'd be there too, you know? It's been years since that shooting, and it still hits me in the gut. When I see different coloured faces, different races, different cultures, different everything, I don't actually feel connected to the white faces. They are them, just instinctively. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I don't mean, oh, them, evil, evil. I mean, I see a brown face, I see a white face. Brown face is like me, even though my face isn't brown. It probably would be if I spent more time outside. Um, and racism is really complicated. There are multiple layers to it, multiple different experiences to it. Mine's been particularly wobbly. And my experience and the experiences of other people in New Zealand of racism is different to other countries because there are different histories, different mindsets, different stereotypes. Um, and so my experience and the experience of those in New Zealand would be very, very different to those people in the protests right now. We don't have a history of being kidnapped and enslaved, for the most part, in New Zealand and within Māoridom. And I can't, I can imagine, I can extrapolate, but because I'm not there, I haven't grown up in that culture, that environment, there's only so much I can do. Same with other non-white groups of people. I can only view racism genuinely, at least, from my experience and the experience that I've had through other people's experiences. But I've done my best to try and make the structural bits of TSU as sort of stretchy and wobbly as I can be so that there's room for people, even if I don't necessarily have a proper understanding of their experiences. I mean, for example, I'm scared of cops. You know, when you're poor and you hang out with lots of Māori folk, non-white folk, you do not trust the cops. But we don't generally shoot people here. Like, there's a special task force that has guns, and only when there's someone else with a gun or a deadly weapon. The dude with the katana got the armed defenders squad on him, but that was a while ago. But on the whole, shootings and deaths by cop are relatively rare, or at least in the public. I hope that doesn't make a liar of me, that there's more. I know there's lots of people getting arrested unfairly or charged or going to jail for however long and all that kind of stuff, the systemic structural stuff. And so for me, just being afraid of the cops because they're likely to smack you around the head with a stick or mace you or arrest you, put you in the drunk tank overnight or whatever, I can't hold in my head how afraid I would be of the cops if all of them had guns. And so I can just, I'm a writer and I have a pretty big imagination, so I can imagine, but I can't hold that feeling here. I can't know what that's like. And so I just, what I'm trying to say is that I've done the best I can, and I've tried to be as open as I can and blurry, like not make lots of rules, lots of strict ideas, so that there's room for different experiences of racism. But if I fuck it up, please forgive me. Or at least tell me what I've done wrong so that I can do my best to change it, or make the next book better, if you know what I mean. Because I want to be better, but it's such a big subject, and I'm not a racism specialist. I'm not, well, I used to be good with philosophy 20 years ago. Right, I should get back to my plan because it's already 20 minutes and I've been waffling. All the reading that I've done and listening and following different discussions online and different groups of people, different experiences of bigotry, because a lot of the time all I do online is read. I follow conversations and I read and I try and absorb other people's perceptions, other people's ideas and experiences and words. I tend to be a word vacuum. And from what I can tell, bigotry seems to be based in this core idea that there's one kind of person with all these different kinds of identity, you know, gender, sex, socioeconomic status, race, religion, culture, all of those, you know, physical ability, hearing, sighted, blah, 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 all of those, this big long list of identities that belong to a particular group of people. And the idea seems to be that everything that's not this particular group of people is inferior, and that these superior people have the right to, or the desire to, enforce that superiority with bullying, violence, torture, accumulating power and building systems to keep those people who aren't like them in their place. I hate that phrase, but it seems to be the most common thing. You know, when people beat up another person, they say, I had to put them in their place. I've said it myself when someone's been ignorant and whatever, but like, it seems to be this concept that one kind of person is perfect and superior and best and right and normal and blah, 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 blah. And that kind of person thinks they have the right to create a world where everyone else who isn't like them in one way or all ways, down, to keep them down, to keep them under, give them less power, less access to human rights, less freedom, less everything. And race seems to be one of the eldest, along with sexism, one of the most, the deepest core of, it seems to be, the white identity. I haven't met or come across any other culture that is so dominant, so determined to be superior, that they'll murder millions and millions of other people just to prove their point. There's plenty of other cultures and countries and whatevers that believe themselves to be superior and look down their noses at people, but it seems to be part of the white colonial or colonist, that invading mindset. We're superior so we can do whatever the hell we want and kill whoever we want because we're better. However completely vomitous that is. And this affects everyone, even the people in the choice group, differently, but it seems to be the core. Not only the belief of superiority, but the belief that they have the right to enforce their superiority, which is, just the thought of it's making me nauseous. So here comes my question. 20 minutes in, 25 minutes in. What would a world look like if this didn't exist in it? So how to build TSU without this idea? When I first started trying to create this, I thought, oh, this is easy. Just don't have a dominant white race. Which actually comes out as kind of unfair. Because a vast majority of white people don't realize that they're a part of that system. They don't realize that, like, there isn't malice. It's a small number of people who have the malice. And so it's kind of unfair to, all white people suck. Put them in the trash. But, I mean, sometimes I want to kick people's butt because it's just, the ignorance is just ridiculous. But with TSU, I did start with, on Planet Shadow at least, with 5 nations. And there are 5 equal nations. No one is more superior, no one invades the other, although Krana and Tola had a bit of a bitch fight 800 years ago. But that was mostly over territory. But none of the 5 countries, 5 cultures of the 5 nations is dominant. Often they'll probably go, oh, it's them, to other countries, but they don't have the desire to enforce their superiority on anyone else. They have treaties between each of the 5 nations that say, basically, non-interference treaties. You do your shit, we'll do our shit, and just, unless we do something really, really horrific, please don't interfere, or even just don't interfere at all. So everyone's culturally equal. So there's no dominance. Everyone's equal. There's no one group of people who's more better or superior or whatever than another. Everyone is equally awesome in their own spaces. And no one looks down their noses at anyone else other than, fashion or, the normal sort of harmless bitchiness that happens between people. And the primary sort of side effect in the story, anyway, of this equality is that no one has to hide their connection to another culture. Like, I've got 2 Ronin characters. Now, the Ronin, technically their race is called Zitan, but on Planet Shadow, it's Ronin. They're black people. And there's no shame over their hair, no shame over their height. They're on average, a good foot taller than everyone else. No one shames them for the traits of their culture, of their particular group, and vice versa. Other than, occasionally probably patting Iranian folk on the head because they're a foot shorter, which no one better do to me because I'll punch them in the stomach. Because I'm short, I'm 5'2". So the upside, the immediate effect is that everyone is who they are. No one's straightening their hair to look for a Ronin person to look Iranian. Tolan people who have purple eyes, they're very, very brown. I don't know how to talk about race without trying to avoid words that could be construed as racism, but the Tolan are the northwest of the 5 nations, and they are very brown, and they've got purple eyes. Their eye colour is almost all purple or black, or brown. And a Tolan person coming into Irana doesn't bleach their skin or put coloured contact lenses so they look Iranian, because there's no shame in being from Tola. Everyone's just accepting and open, and diverse. Everyone celebrates their own cultural holidays or religious holidays, and it sort of melds together. So diversity is not a bad thing, particularly visual diversity. Now, as an overview, the Five Nations, Iran, which is the country where the rebels are and the agency, is white, essentially. White people. I did this deliberately just because when I first created Five Nations and the ideas of the characters and everything, I didn't have enough information about other cultures, and I didn't feel like it was my place to write, for example, from a Ronin point of view. I mean, I know it's my fictional world and I can create the culture as whatever I want, but my original vision was to create TSU, have the story is in the middle, and then you get all these little structural bits, and then other people later on come in and do their own stories set in TSU, and then they establish their own canon within the context of the story about other groups. And so I started with Iranan because I know white culture, mostly, at least New Zealand white culture, and that would leave 4 other nations for people to play with later, one day when I'm rich and famous. So the Iranan folk are the white folk, and they're the centre of the story. Just because someone had to be the centre of the story. Ronin are west of Irana, so the entire country of Rona is west of Irana. Below both of them is Basa, which I don't know how to say this without sounding offensive. They would be people of East Asian descent, like Japanese or Chinese or that part of the world. And other than a basic structure, it's been mostly open. I haven't expanded beyond they live in a tropical jungle and have created cities under the jungle, underground cities. That's it. That's all I've done, pretty much, to let other people create later, or at least give me more room to create later when I know more. North of Irana, so northeast of the Five Nation continent, is Krana, and they're I call them tall hobbits because that's what I'm called. It's doubly amusing calling myself a tall hobbit because I'm literally like an hour away from actual Hobbiton, which I still haven't managed to visit yet. Because in Krana, the people tend to be about my height. So 1.5 meters tall, essentially. I would probably be a tall Kranan. So everyone's shorter. They have a more variety of appearance, like different skin tone, but they're basically like taller. They're of different levels of brown. So you got essentially 5 base races on Planet Shadow. And then you've got, so it's Tola, Krana, Rona, Arana, and Basa. Or Basa, Basan, depending on the sentence structure. You've also got a secret 6th nation, Nathan, called Haven. And they're basically a country made up of people who were in trouble and needed to be evacuated. So they don't have anyone they're very multicultural. In New Zealand, we'd say melting pot sort of culture. So you've got these 5 relatively strict racial groups as countries, and Haven are the blurry one. There's actually a big, long story reason for this, which I won't go into because it's spoilers, but I wanted to bounce off the ideas. I wanted to explore the ideas of race within the culture. And so having these, one of my mistakes, which I can't go back on, is the idea of hybrids. I created a religion based on a set of events that happened in their real life, that then got turned into a religion and fictionized, if you will. And one of the parts of the religion state to keep each of the 5 nations separate, so don't interbreed. So there's this idea of hybrids. So 2 races, one person of each race breed and have a child, and the child is a hybrid. As I said, it's a terrible idea, but I can't actually take it out of the structure now. I've tried to lower the incidents in the books, but it's part of the core creation of the story. And so the 5 nations have only been legally allowed to interbreed for about 100 years. It was 2890, 2885, somewhere about there. So it's 120, 130 years before, after they're legally allowed to interbreed. So the 5 nations, while there are blurry bits in the middle, and the edges, they're still relatively discrete cultures and sets of racial traits. So I wanted to explore that purity idea without having the vomitous side to that, because race is skin deep, literally. Like, it's not, there's no reflection of anything. Your skin color doesn't actually, other than connecting you to cultural differences or religious or whatever, there's no biological difference. It doesn't make you smarter or less smart. It doesn't make you stronger or weaker or nothing. None of those definitions within racism, when you say this person of this race has these traits, whether they're positive or negative, it's all bollocks. It's all baloney. We're all people. And so I wanted to explore that how we use it as a purity thing in a way external to that idea that the appearance of race has any impact on a person's nature or worth or anything. And then contrasting it with Havenite culture, which is very melting pot. I don't know if I succeeded, because the discussion, is hard to discuss something that your characters aren't particularly aware of. They don't have, I deliberately created a universe where they didn't have that dominant race that went around murdering and destroying other people, which is good, but because they're not conscious aware of it, it's harder to explore through the characters, what those mean, which is one of the reasons why I brought in the hyperphobic stuff, because at least then there's conflict, shame, or similar things to explore, but it still came out as a form of racism, and I didn't want it in there. Now I've got 2 Ronin characters who are main characters, Jessel and Lilan. Lilan you meet in Rise of Hawk. which is the first book, and Giselle is a main character in the second book, Time Speaker. They're both Rona Ban, which are like the Ronin version of the rebels, but worse. They bomb people. They're literal terrorists. But Lelan and Giselle were the best that I could do for, in my head anyway, for representation. They're both amazing characters. They're so much fun. I love Lelan. Lelan is so much fun to have in my head while I'm writing. Her perspective is fun, albeit a little bit sex-focused. But that's okay. Some people are sex-focused. It's all good. So there are definitely two black main characters. I didn't know kind of where to go from here without sounding potentially dodgy or like exploring the Ronin culture. I wanted to leave it as open and blank as possible, or blurry, I guess is a better word than blank, because I don't know enough of other people's narrative, particularly black folk in the US. I don't know their narrative. I don't know the language, the colloquial dialect that they use, the how they use words to express their identity. You know, I don't know that kind of stuff. In fact, when I hear there's certain groups of folks, like rapper sort of genre of culture, they talk, and I'm like, I know you're saying something, but what are you saying? Can you talk in plain English? And then I realize it's kind of rude. So I just sit there and go, okay, yeah, I understand, honest. Because I don't want to be rude, but I don't understand it. And I'm not going to write something if I don't understand it or don't have an acceptable level of understanding. And I wanted to leave the Ronin culture, the Ronin nomenclature and dialect sort of stuff to other people who can put their own dialects, their own nomenclature, their own colloquial language and cultural bits and sass. They can do it themselves. They can help people to feel they belong because there's room for them to create their own stories. I mean, as long as it sticks to canon, you know, and doesn't there's police brutality in Rona, but that's not because of race, that's because of being psychic. The government kills every single psychic they come across, even if they're children. So, you know, if you're psychic, you run and hide. And that was the only way I could sort of add in a similar sort of horror to the police brutality that happens in many areas of the US without it being about race specifically, because I wanted to create a universe where race wasn't a thing, like a racism thing. Sometimes I feel like I'm turning myself into a pretzel trying to create all of these structures in a way that interact with them in a way together to make a sanctuary place, a place for all those who experience systemic oppression. Race has been particularly difficult because I was told for most of my life that if I could pass as white, I should just be white. That being Māori was somehow shameful. And so there's a lot of that internalized stuff that some of the other internalized biases, they hurt less. They're just, oh, wow, I came up with it. Gosh, that came out of my mouth. Oh my gosh, I'm going to have to, like, explore that. But it doesn't hurt me. It just has the potential to hurt other people, so I'm trying to make it so I don't hurt people. But racism has hurt me, so it's been a very difficult subject to try and play with, and I'm still I'm still playing with it, still trying to figure out, sort of turning it up and side down and pulling it apart and putting it back together and trying to understand, and in the process trying to understand my own identity as a non-white person with a white face. So I absolutely am totally sure that I've screwed it up. So I apologize if there's anything that's really obvious in advance. Because it's been a process to try and understand and to learn and to explore my own feelings, my own internalized programming, you know. And it hurts because I've always felt Maori, but all of society has told me that that's a thing that I shouldn't want, that I shouldn't be. It's the same level, really, for me as being trans. I spent my whole life trying to pretend to be a woman because that's what everyone wanted me and demanded of me. And now I'm getting bullshit from all angles because I've said, no, actually, I'm not a woman, and this is who I am, and now people are getting shitty, and I get the same thing, or a similar sort of level of pain and hurt and abuse when I say, actually, I know I look white, but I'm actually Māori, and stop being a racist pig, or prick is probably a better word, preta? Yeah, racist knobhead, yeah. I always associate preta with knobhead, because they're both really nicely shaped words, and they roll off the tongue. Yeah, preta, or knobhead. Probably dodgy, and there's, you know, gender issues and lots to unpack. But because it's so painful, it's hard to create something that hurts, that you don't even know your own answers for. So it's an ongoing and long-term project. I hope what I've done so far is good enough, is open enough to let other people in. I've got my notes on my screen in front of me, and one of the things that people don't realize when they read, particularly if they're white, when they read Rise of Hawk and Time Speaker when it was out, it's not currently out yet again, but is people assume that most of the characters are white. I mean, Giselle and Lilana are obvious. If you know what Ronin means, you know they're not white. But, like, of the main characters, it's pretty much just Hawk and Cassandra who are actually white. Asha and Talon are part Tolan. Nalana, she's a lady. She's actually got a title that she's going to inherit by 3010 or 3015. And her family line, the titled line that Nalana inherits, the Zuru line, were actually the, I guess, what's the word? The monarchy for Tola. So she probably presents as mostly white, but she's not. And Nama is part, his grandfather's parents, his great-grandmother was Lady Isharu, so she was from Basa, and further along in the path, another branch of Nama's family, the Armon line, they're actually Tolan as well. Oh, Kranen. And so even though people assume that Nama's white, he's actually not. He's really not. Who else? Jola is an Armon, so she is Kranen and Tolan as well. Off the top of my head, the only actually white characters are Hawk and Cassandra's cousins. The Malar family is definitely white. But people assume when they read, they assume that everyone's white, or most people are white. I don't know quite how to, I haven't figured out how to describe it, because they don't notice, they don't care. So you're a little browno, so you've got purple eyes. I made a particular deal of it with Nalana, because she's got the purple night vision sheen of her Tolan ancestors, while otherwise appearing to be a Ranan. So for her, the reason why the characters noticed that for her is that because they immediately thought, upon meeting her, that she was a Ranan, mostly. But the purple betrays the connection to Tola, and it was worth observing. But everyone else, like, it's not a deal, it's not a thing. It's like, oh, nice to meet you, Jessel. Oh, you're Ronan. Cool, you're taller than I am. Don't touch my head. And that's it. They walk and they talk and they move on, or whatever. It's not a thing. See, that's the consistent feature with my process of trying to take these bigotries out of the story, or to create a story without these bigotries. They then become not noticeable, and so it makes it harder to show the representation that's been written into the story but cannot be described. Like, no one cares that Nama isn't 100% Iranan. He's just Nama. The yellow eyes is actually the Basan ancestry, particularly. But it's I think I said this in another video, that when you write from a character-driven perspective, you can't say, hey, that person's brown, or that person's a trans person, or you can't necessarily be obvious about the representation in the story, which is why if I ever get ridiculously famous and stuff and people want to actually make movies and stuff out of it, I'm going to make sure that they correctly cast the characters. But because I can't state it in the text as easy, one day if I get people drawing my characters, they're likely going to not have the race right of the character. They'll make a white Jessal, which is fine. It's how race works in your brain. You find something that you identify with, and it's not, even if it's explicitly stated what they look like, you'll sometimes project your own expectations on that character, and that will become what that character looks like in your head. So I'm not expecting everyone to have exactly the same character shape as me, but I would like to try and express the fact that, well, at least express who is the representations for different people, different groups, different areas, different elements that are oppressed in our world that are not in my world. I mean, I know there's going to be arguments later with people, but it's all right. It's kind of the nature of people to be argumentative. We project our own expectations on other people and then expect them to be that thing. But the biggest struggle for me with racism has been, or taking racism out, has been that I can't describe. I mean, how do you describe, for example, how do you describe Nama, who, right now, if I could choose an actor for him, it would be Jason Momoa, with yellow contacts. I mean, without using Earth racial terms without using Earth descriptions? How do you describe someone, their appearance, without firstly sounding racist or secondly sounding creepy? There's no word for skin tone that doesn't have oddly negative connotations. Like I saw a description of someone, something silly. It was different kinds of coffee or something. And it seems kind of ridiculous to me, but it was interpreted as being racist. But if you're in a universe that does not have our cultural and spiritual and race-connected terms, how do you describe race without sounding racist? In that context, I mean, like, the best I could do for Jessal and the Ronin people was to describe them as coal-coloured giants, or coal, something to do with coal. I probably wouldn't use the word colour because that's got really bad connotations. I mean, exactly, there's my problem. I haven't figured out how to describe how people look, how people are, their connections, in a way that a reader will immediately go, okay, Ronin means this, Basan means this. It's such a complex problem. I keep trying. I'm hoping eventually people will realize that I'm trying. And even when I screw it up, I'm honestly trying my best. And if people have the time and emotional energy to point it out and say, hey, what about this term? What about that term? Or in this context, you know, in my country or in my town or where I grew up, we see these things. Like, I have genuinely heard of people using coffee as a complimentary way of describing skin tone, but only within a particular context and only within I think it was a black community, a particular black community, like a town or a city, and between other black people it was okay, but it's only gross if it's a white person doing it or a non-black person. So context is obviously key, but you can't control the context in a book because the reader changes the context. They're not necessarily reading the text in my voice with my context. They're reading it in their context, and so every reader changes the context, the racial context. But if I waited until everything was perfect, I would never get started. So I'm doing my best, and I'm hoping that people will listen and notice and understand that they're welcome, even if I screw stuff up. The summary is, I've tried to create TSU where race isn't as big a deal as it is here. It has to be a deal because race and culture form our individual identity. I imagine there could be a way of creating a society where skin colour didn't affect anything, but that's not what I've created. Besides, that would be really hard to conceptualize and probably really hard to read because you've got nothing to personally relate to your characters through, if you know what I mean. You have to have some similarities, otherwise you can't identify with them. and therefore if you can't identify with them, you can't really care about them, and then if you can't care about them, why read the book? But the TSU is about coming home, about being welcome, for the most part, specifically targeted at people who experience systemic oppression. And to do with race, I've tried to create it in such a way that race isn't a big deal. There isn't a dominance or a superiority or anything like that. People are beautiful as they are. The diversity is beautiful. And I hope I've pulled it off relatively well. If not, I will be learning some more. Anyway, it's been an hour now, so I'm going to stop talking before my voice stops. Hopefully next week, I may have to split next week's video into two, because ableism is a very big, huge subject, and I'm still screwing with it, but still having trouble getting my head around certain aspects of it. But hopefully I will see you next week, and hopefully there'll be one week this year when something completely bizarre doesn't happen. Still hoping. Ara ni tasa.